All right, it's 4:30, time to start our meeting that we've expanded because there's a lot to discuss. And there we go. Apologize, I don't have so let's call that to order. We got everybody here, if we could make a note of attendance. And the next thing's agenda approval.
So moved.
Second.
What are you moving? You didn't say what you were moving.
You said what you said, and I said, move to approve the agenda as presented.
You still stand by your second there?
I stand by it.
We are approved then. Okay, then let's move on to public comments. Is there anyone in the building who wishes to make public comment?
I guess that's just a question.
Right up here. Yeah.
Introduce myself or?
Yeah, you just say your name and your city
All right,
that you
yeah.
live in.
Alec Anderson. I live in Washington State. I'm
You
living
got a
on the
city there, or are you just like really nomadic?
nomadic. Yeah, so I live on the ridge over there in a house.
Okay.
I'm on the board of the ROA as well, which I'm not here for that. But just kind of, I know Kimley Horn came and did the evaluation for the survey in terms of what we're looking for improvements for public works, and just kind of representing hopefully the dog park as being one of the primary interests of the not the ROA of the community up there. So just kind of curious if there's any been progress in that at all, or I was hoping to kind of hear about that today. That is so.
That is not currently on our agenda, but I can point you to people to talk to. Who would be the best person to email on that?
Probably me,
Jeff Hamlin. And what's your email, Jeff?
Jay
On the
Hamlin
website,
at Snoqualmie Law.
Yeah.
I've got emails from.
Yeah, you know.
Jeff knows just about everything and can give you the updated progress on that. When do we get a report from those folks?
Well,
In
we're
about
giving
10
a-
minutes.
Yeah, you're getting one tonight on the park.
There you go.
Recreation Open space plan.
Okay. Is that being covered in the meeting or is that something later on?
That'll
We're not
come. When?
Oh, I say we're not specifically talking about the dog park tonight, but we're giving an update today on where we're at on progress, status, and the community outreach portion of it.
What you're interested in is called the Parks, Recreation, Open Space and Trails Plan, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about that. That'll be our second discussion point after we go over an agenda bill today. Okay, glad you're here.
Yeah.
All right, any other public comment? You got something to say? You good? Okay. Okay, let's move on to the approval of the minutes dated July 2nd, 2024. Do I have a motion to approve that?
I so move that.
I'll second.
All right, we are approved then. And let's move on to agenda bills. AB 24-082. I think we get to hear from Mr. Vining on this one.
There, here's start. Starting. Oh, that's fine. No.
Good evening, Parks and Public Works Committee, Andrew Vining, project engineer. This agenda bill is to follow up on the previous agenda bill related to our reclaimed water system improvements that we're currently under design for. So the city produces and distributes reclaimed water during summer months of the year to preserve potable water resources for drinking water purposes. Reclaimed water offsets potable water usage by up to 15% during peak demand. The improvements will include a new 400,000 gallon reservoir and a new pump station located along Ridge Street next to the BPA power line. In the last discussion, there were a few questions surrounding the necessity of the project. In a nutshell, these improvements are necessary to bring our outdated system to current standards and ensure safe and reliable delivery of reclaimed water and continued conservation of potable water. So the long version, which is provided in this agenda, which includes a pretty extensive legislative history, including city and state background. I'm going to try and unpack and summarize here, but So reclaimed water was first codified in 1992 in Washington State under RCW 9046. Shortly after, in 1997, the city's reclaimed water system was constructed as it stands today. The system was built to the standards at the time, which focused on regulation control of reclaimed water at the point of production, which for our city includes sand filtration and UV disinfection at the WRF. Water is sampled daily, and if for some reason off-spec water is produced, it is not delivered up the hill to Eagle Lake for distribution. In 2006, state legislation updated RCW 9046 to improve safety and reliability of reclaimed water, which is in response to population growth and global warming. This RCW directed state agencies to develop a greater framework to encourage the use of reclaimed water. And it kicked off a 12-year effort between state agencies, Department of Ecology and Department of Health, to develop framework for what we now call the Reclaimed Water Rule. This was published in 2018 under WAC 173219. So the 2018 Reclaimed Water Rule includes requirements for storage and distribution of reclaimed water to ensure that Class A water is not degraded after production, so after we produce it at the WRF. The city's distribution system doesn't meet these storage and delivery requirements. And city staff have observed times where water quality is degraded, which is a result of the water being stored in Eagle Lake up on the ridge. The proposed reservoir improvements will isolate the city's distribution system from outside sources and provide city operations staff with total control of Class A water produced. These improvements are necessary to ensure safe and deliverable and reliable delivery of reclaimed water and preservation of future potable water resources. So that's me unpacking what we have in our legislative history here. And I would be happy to answer questions. Jeff Hamlin and Director Chambliss is also here. Yep. Pass that to Mike.
So I'm going to jump into this point. During previous discussions about the project, staff made comment to the fact that the people that work with the water, our staff that works with the water, were claiming that the water was making them sick. Staff, when they made those comments, did not stress the fact that they were anecdotal comments. No investigation was ever done prior to that date to confirm those claims to see if they were factually based. Upon hearing that, several council members, some of which are present in the room today and others, became greatly alarmed and contacted me about it, and I shared their alarm. Lots of things ran through my head at once. Were people using the PPE correctly? Did we have some problem with our reporting system where people are not reporting injury and illnesses on the jobs? There were many, many different things that all just flashed through my brain in that 1 second. And I said, we will get to the bottom of this. So part of my investigation into our breakdown was to actually pull the sick leave usage of several previous years for all three divisions of the water department, the clean water department, the used water department, and the recycled water side of things. And what I was looking to see is, was there a big peak in time off because they're always sick? They're all doing similar work. They're all working with the material, getting it on them, changing pipes, etc. And what I found was that the sick leave usage was a flat line. It was the same across the board for all three divisions. So that was telling me that there was no outbreak of illness being done. At that point, then I did engage Jeff and I did engage the supervisors to confirm that staff were being provided with the PPE that they required and desired. And I stressed with Jeff, and Jeff will confirm it, that if there was a particular piece of PPE that staff wanted, it is my philosophy to provide it, because if they want it, they're going to use it, rather than being forced to use a piece of PPE that doesn't fit necessarily comfortably for them, etc. So that is my standard. I went over that with Jeff. He agrees with me wholeheartedly, and that is the policy that is continuing at Parks and Public Works. where if staff ask for a particular PPE, it is provided because we want them to use it. Also confirm that staff had all the PPE, they do, that they were using the PPE correctly. And then we went over the fact that we had no injury, illness, accident reports for exposure to pathogens in the water, et cetera. And once I dove down into it, the fact of the matter was that was a comment that was made in the lunchroom among the guys that got overheard and repeated. So there is no illness outbreak among our staff. Our staff are trained appropriately. They're behaving appropriately. They've been provided with appropriate PPE and they know how to handle the material. I also did a deep dive into the material that we are producing. And I had the numbers. In fact, I think they're included in the agenda bill. The numbers of the water quality that we are producing at the plant and reviewed them. And they're all 000s. So we do not have a breakdown in our system where we are producing bad water. We are producing legally compliant, clean water that actually exceeds the water out in nature as it is now. And then as we've discussed, Councilperson Benson and I met independently on this a couple of times. As we discussed, I did ask to have a sample taken from Eagle Lake just to see if it turned up positive for it. Jeff, I'm going to ask you to say the word so I don't say it wrong. Thank you. Okay, I used the wrong word. And it did. It was there.
It was what?
There are coliforms in the water in Eagle
Coliform
Lake.
bacteria.
Those are bad ones.
Those are bad ones.
Okay, all right.
Now, we did not take that and really isolate it down to the species and what illnesses they can occur. We do the test for coliforms, which is the big circus tent. We don't, had it been water that we were producing, we would have gone further down to identify what the pathogen was so we could figure out what the problem was. But since it's not required and we're just proving the point that they were there, that was as far as we needed to go. So they're there and we know they're there. So we're producing compliant water. We are putting it in a lake and is becoming non-compliant, which is the reason for this project. And that's why we're here today.
Okay, all right, I'm going to restate what you just said to make sure that I fully understand everything that I'm hearing. You're saying that we make great reclaimed water. It's zeros across the board. It's good stuff. We pump it up to Eagle Lake where it's stored. And while it's in storage in Eagle Lake, it gets contaminated, apparently with coliforms that have the potential to make somebody sick.
Correct.
We have no direct evidence that anyone has yet been made sick, but there is minimal anecdotal comment that it is potentially icky. And that's the reason that the state is saying we need to have this reservoir in place to make sure that the water that we're producing before it is used in irrigation stays at zeros across the board.
Yes, but you conflated two items there at the end that I want to be. The state is not saying it because there's a minimum, because our staff is.
Right. The state's saying it because, yeah,
it needs to stay pure until it gets dispersed by the sprinkler at the end of the line. And that is why they are requiring us to do this project.
okay, all right. Thank you. I appreciate that clarity. Any questions, council members? All right, thank you.
Thank you. I will be following up future council meetings with agenda bills for contract related.
Yeah, and if you can inform when you do this presentation to the full council of what we just discussed so that everybody is clear on this, that would be, because my understanding was different. The way that I was managing to understand what we were being told was that we'd never had a problem. This is just state bureaucracy making us jump through an $8 million hoop. And that's upsetting, I think, probably to everyone. So it's helpful to know that we are producing fantastic reclaimed water. And then once we store it in Eagle Lake, it is no longer that. One other question unrelated to that, really. Once this reservoir is in place, it holds 400,000 gallons. How often will that, say in an August, be filled up and used?
Well, it'll depend on the time of the year. So there's higher demands in, say, August or September versus,
So but in August, we can produce as many as 1.5 million gallons a day. Is that
that's
right?
right, yes.
So will we be filling this up every day and emptying it every day?
No, there'll be some turnover and we will have some maintenance, chlorination on site.
And the extra water that we can't fit in this reservoir will continue to go to Eagle Lake and be used by the golf course and,
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
all right, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, question.
So the golf course is going to continue to use the Eagle Lake as their reservoir for their irrigation system for the golf course.
That's right.
Do they not need to comply with ecology?
No. No,
Because,
place of use. Once it's delivered to the lake, it's their water.
okay.
And
Interesting.
they don't operate a distribution system, whereas we do have a distribution system.
So their sprinkler system's not a distribution system.
Sorry, it's not
Not
a
to a public.
public.
Yeah, it's a private
Okay.
entity.
All right, and I wanted to tell you that I only skimmed through the purple book. I did not read it page for page. So-
Oh, come on, that's fun.
It's a big one, but chapter 7, storage and delivery. So there you go. All right.
That's the exciting
you.
one.
Thank you for providing. All right, moving on to discussion items. First one, deliberation and review of the utility rate study, 2025 to 2030 utilities capital improvement
Sure.
plan.
You want to swap the orders of those discussions since we have audience here for the second discussion?
Yeah, we could do that. Does that work for you, Kat? Okay, all right. Why don't we go ahead and do the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space and Trails Post Plan discussion.
All right. We have Nick Chen from Kimley Horn, our consultant, who is developing the pros plan. He is going to give a presentation today and give an update on the draft findings from the community outreach efforts. And then we'll talk a little bit about policy and try to get some input on that.
And if you have
So-
anything to say about a dog park, I know that there are people here who'd like to hear about that.
There is a little bit, so I won't tease it out too much. See if we can get back to the first slide. So, okay, great. Hopefully everyone gets a chance. There it is. So thanks, Jeff. My name is Nick Chen with Kimley Horn. I've met a number of you through the outreach that we've done here. Excited to come back and present some of the findings that we have and some of the general feedback we've received as part of that outreach effort. We'll go through tonight culmination of what came out of the outreach effort, feedback we've heard, some of the analysis that was done in terms of inventory, what that results in terms of overall goals, which is where I think we're really going to look to you all for feedback because these are initial goals. They're drafts right now that we're trying to get feedback on and finalize. And then we'll go into next steps of what's going to happen after this meeting. So I also wanted to mention on the line, Marissa Pellegrini and Randall Kopp, who I think you all potentially have all met as well, because they've been in and out as well, are here. Marissa helped with a lot of the outreach and the overall plan, and then Randall conducted the inventory and again, working on the overall plan as well. So they're really great resources if you have kind of more technical questions or something that I'm not able to help answer. So with that, we just have a short, 10 or 12 slide presentation to kind of walk through. And after that, happy to take your questions. So I want to do a little reminder of the project goals when we started off, and this is in the outreach as well. We had a lot of goals when we embarked on this PROS plan, the Park Rec Open Space and Trails plan. But primarily, a lot of these can boil down to we wanted to do a full and complete evaluation of the city's existing inventory, the resources that were available. We wanted to work with the community and with staff to identify priorities, what was important, also what's feasible based on the capital improvements plan. And we have made recommendations to work in coordination with staff on a draft capital improvements plan based on some of our findings. We wanted to look for gaps in both amenities and programming. And you'll see some of the results of that as we go through the rest of the presentation. We also wanted to make sure there was an equitable distribution of parks, both again, parks and recreational opportunities throughout the community. Some of what we heard, and I think was fairly obvious when we first started, is there's not a currently equal distribution of parks facilities throughout the entire city. There are a lot on the ridge. There are not as many downtown. So we'll go into a little bit of what we heard there as well. And then we also, in terms of just distribution, we heard there's a lot of activities for youth, but not so many for older kids and for adults. So, although I did hear about soccer, and I was listening in here earlier. So, and we also wanted to just overall look at potential opportunities for either funding or partnership opportunities to be able to support some of the future efforts that go as part of this plan. So really quickly, wanted to look at just what Snoqualmie has in terms of an inventory system. You can see here, the big number there is 600 plus acres of, really that's parks and open space. That could be trails, natural areas, pocket parks, neighborhood parks, and then larger community parks as well. You can see sort of the breakdown, but the big takeaway is that probably far and away more than the vast majority of cities we work with, Snoqualmie has just more parks than pretty much any city that I've ever seen. So it was a great evaluation to go through and tackle each one. Community engagement. Want to tee up a little bit about what we talked about when we first started the project. You can see just one of the flyers on the right side there. But we conducted a couple of community workshops. We had virtual engagement in terms of a city website and mapping exercise and survey that were on there as well. We did a parks inventory, went out and visited the parks. We participated in a couple events and then held more so than events, held stakeholder interviews with both members of city staff. We worked with some community members as well. And then we held committee meetings as well. So a little bit on the project website and social media campaign, there was a couple different ways to engage online. This is where we saw a lot of our feedback. This is often where we see a lot of feedback just because of the flexibility it provides people to be able to give input at their own time. And it also is a great way to be able to identify specific resources through that map exercise on the right. So community members had an option to take an online survey. They could leave a comment on the map about either improvements they wanted to see, areas they think need to be addressed, or just big ideas that they had. There's also a priorities tool that helped us to kind of determine what was most important to the community. We listed a number of different potential programming options and potential recreational facility options. And that's where we got back into what you'll see coming up here, which is a list of priorities that came directly out of the community engagement and our meetings with staff and stakeholders as well. And then there was also a share your big idea board. We got some interesting information there as well. So big picture, what we saw, we did 6 city leadership, staff, and stakeholder interviews, 2 public workshops. There were almost 1,000 project website visits. We received 137 unique survey respondents, and then 250 individual points on that map. Those were different comments. 47 big ideas that came on there, and then 64 used the budgeting tool. So a total of 3,000 plus inputs into that online website tool, which is a really great turnout for a community engagement effort. And I think we saw that really early on when we first published the map, and we saw, I think, a good number of inputs into that map in the first couple of weeks. So a little bit of what came out of that. We're going to cover amenities and facilities first, and then we're going to talk about programming. So these are ranked in priority in terms of what was ranked the highest in that prioritization exercise, and also in combination of what we heard the most of in terms of comments. Access to natural areas and rivers is really important. Multi-use paths. They're on their aquatics and pool facilities. And then I teased it earlier, 4th on there, off-leash dog park. 5th on there, multi-use fields. 6th, boardwalk near the wetlands. 7, indoor fitness and exercise facilities. 8, the disc golf course. 9, recreation center, community center, and 10, playground equipment. So there were other options that were on the website. They ranked a little bit lower than the ones you see there, but that helped us to, when we go look at the individual park facilities and also look at the capital improvements plan, know where to prioritize potential future projects or improvements to different parks. This gives us a really good basis rooted in data, both anecdotal and from the website, as a good place to go for recommendations. So I'll cover programming, and then I'll cover the rest of the presentation. And if we want to go back and highlight a few things, we can always do that as well. So top on programming needs was actually adult sports opportunities. I covered that a little bit earlier. Think of that as well as basically anything outside of youth sports. So we did here in some of the community outreach that once students get to high school, there are less recreational opportunities available. So there's that kind of older kid range and adult range as well. Learn to swim programs, outdoor fitness programs, youth sports is on there as well. Fitness and wellness programming, special events, large festivals. You'll see that a little bit later as well in terms of one of the goals and policies. Free low-cost community events, hobby interest classes, arts programs, and then nature and environmental education. So you can see here the top 10 programming needs based on the outreach feedback that we received. So from there, this is a little bit about what how we take that information and go into a goals and recommendations process, which is what you're going to see on the next couple of slides. And what you see here is basically we look at trends in past documents. So we look at high-level data that we can receive or is publicly available. We look at past planning efforts the city has gone through in relation to the Parks and Rec. We do an inventory and we benchmark the condition of items at each of the facilities. And then we go through business planning in terms of capital improvements and looking at potential opportunities for future projects. We do our community involvement and also meet with leadership, and those are the stakeholder meetings. So high level, all 5 of those elements help go into what ultimately shapes into the plan, the recommendations and the goals and policies that we make as part of that. So the last portion we have to cover is the identified goals. And this is what I would say we would like your feedback on tonight, as well as, obviously we can provide information on other parts of the plan as well. These are draft form. We've worked on them with city staff, but they are not finalized by any means. If they have feedback, we'd love to hear it. First on the list is create an equitable and inclusive park system. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but there was an identified lack of facilities in comparison to a number that are available on the ridge in downtown. So there's just because of how development occurred and the parks requirements that went in with new development, there are a number of small parks of varying, we'll say of varying quality in terms of the equipment that's there, but also of varying programming in terms of what's available at each of those individual parks. And then also just inclusivity in terms of youth and adult sports and making sure folks in the community have opportunities to engage with recreation, engage with open spaces here. So inclusivity in both senses. Next, we have enhanced community connectivity. And we saw this really being, this is a broad term that you'll see when we get into the individual policies that go with it. But this is both physical connectivity. We identified a number of trail connections that, for one reason or another, did not make full connections to allow physical connectivity throughout the community, throughout all of Snoqualmie. But also both like social connectivity of residents and opportunities to engage in public spaces and to meet together for recreation. So you'll see a number of couple of policies related to that as well. Celebration of natural resources. We talked about 600+ acres of mostly open natural resource space. Protection of those was really important to the community. So identifying education programs and those types of things, some of which already exist in the community. So it's more of a messaging of people understanding what's available. And some is a further emphasis on that. And then lastly, reinvesting in aging parks. This was really, I think, we'll say original intent of the plan was there are a lot of parks facilities, as we mentioned, in Snoqualmie. A lot of them are of similar age and similar condition, and to the point where we need to identify what is the highest and best use of those parks in terms of identifying funding for potential improvements or determining whether they should go into a more passive, less cost and time intensive to maintain type of quality. So we're going to go through each one of those goals, and I promise I'll go through fairly quickly. But in terms of equitable distribution of parks and amenities, I covered this a little bit. It is making sure we have that physical distribution throughout the community so that residents can hopefully walk to park facilities that not just are there, but meet the needs that they have for their families, for themselves. And so that goes into the programming of each of the facilities. Also looking at increased recreational opportunities downtown. That's mainly the area that is currently, I won't say lacking, but it's in need of additional facilities. So basically said lacking, but just a bit different. Year-round recreational programming became interesting as well. There are obviously some winter recreational activities, but vast majority of the open space recreational activities are summer. There's a regionally and sometimes statewide resource in the past in terms of winter activities, but Snoqualmie proper, there were opportunities for further year-round activities. And then lastly, recreational programming for all ages and abilities. And I covered that a little bit earlier, making sure that there are opportunities for youth as well as older youth, and then getting into young adults and adults for recreational activity. Enhancing community connectivity, I mentioned earlier, there are trails networks. So one of the goals is connect trails networks to the river and create a riverfront path corridor. The river is seen as a huge resource for the community. It's an absolutely beautiful place to go, and having safe connections to it and usable connections to it was something that showed up in the community outreach and the conversations that we had. Complete key multi-use paths to support a strong trails network. This one has a little bit of a caveat in terms of we're working with staff to identify some of these connections, but there are some gaps that are there for a reason. There's some gaps that are out of sort of the city's control because of maybe land ownership or different reasons. So still identifying what those are and trying to work through those potential issues, but understanding that it's not just simply a go out and build it tomorrow type thing. There are more complicated things that go into some of those. Effectively communicate park and recreation offerings and events. This is a little bit of a publicity of what the city's doing now. The city has had a lot of great events that go on, so making sure there's different ways to get residents involved and make sure people know about what's going on. This is more of a maintenance thing of keeping that up and continuing to find new ways to get the message out to the community. And then create a formal volunteer program and advertise opportunities for volunteer participation in parks and forest maintenance programs. We did have some conversations, and I forget the name of the gentleman that we spoke to on this, but he mentioned he does do a little bit of work with maintenance of trails and that kind of things. And there are a lot of people who are really interested, but the kind of interesting thing about the work that he was doing is a lot of the volunteers that he had came from outside of Snoqualmie because they were really interested in just trail maintenance and natural resources. So he was saying that there are ways to get more investment for community members. That would be a great thing. Celebrating natural resources. So talking a little bit about that. Promote intentional, responsible, and strategic water use. Create areas again for riverfront and forestry recreation and environmental education. So these will go a little bit more to education programs, methods of opportunities for recreation, and then communication and education of the city's existing continued conservation efforts. And then lastly, we have reinvest in aging parks. So continued focus on replacement or repurposing of aging playgrounds and infrastructure. Covered that a little bit as being one of the main focuses of the plan right from the start. A focus on asset management, replacement, and preventative maintenance. This is one of the ways that this will help is we are working with the city's new database to be able to do the full facilities assessment and get it input in a way that will be able to be maintained going forward, so that our data is kind of talking with the city's data and everybody's in the same place. Conduct community outreach for site-specific park plans. So one of the things that the plan does is it evaluates each individual park facility and makes recommendations on what could occur there based on the outreach that we heard and based on the capital improvements and research that was done and discussions had with city staff. It is not site design specific for future parks improvements, right? It's a higher level type plan. So when you go forward and you start to consider future projects, making sure to conduct additional community outreach about those different park facilities. I know a lot of that occurs already with some of even the inclusive playground that went in Centennial, that there's new park facilities coming up even to today. And then lastly, invest in parks that may serve as city gateways, special event venues. One of the programming needs we did see was the ability to hold special events or larger community type events in different spaces. And so finding ways to invest in areas like to promote those facilities as well. With that, I'll stop talking after this slide. Next steps, we're going to review strategies and recommendations. We're also going to review proposed visionary projects as part of the capital improvement plan recommendations. Those are longer term projects that probably require a little bit of funding and more planning, but are kind of bigger impact projects as well. We'll do a review of the pre-final document or comment. So currently we are working on compiling all the information that we've talked about here, as well as the inventory that was done, potential recommendations, all of that into the actual plan document to meet the requirements for what the document needs to contain. And then we will go to council for consideration for adoption. And that was my last slide. Thank you. I appreciate you all taking time. As I mentioned, both Marissa and Randall and myself we're all available to answer any questions you might have or give any feedback.
Any questions?
I think this gentleman is waiting to hear any input that was brought up about dog parks. For the ridge.
I will ask this guy a little bit in terms of Marissa, if there was any, obviously it was one of the things that was brought up to make it on the list of, it was in the fourth position for priorities in terms of facilities. Was there anything specific, Marissa, for dog parks in terms of recommendations?
Thanks, Nick. I think at this time, we're still looking and evaluating the different strategies and recommendations, as well as the visionary projects. So we're still utilizing all of the outreach, but at this time, there's not a specific dog park project identified. That doesn't mean there won't be. It's just that we're not at that stage yet in the project.
So I know it's maybe not the answer you wanted to hear. It's yeah, it's in terms of what was shared. It is one of the higher priority items that was identified as part of the community outreach. As Marissa mentioned, the next steps is talking about different areas, and the plan may not ever actually mention a specific area. This should be a dog park type thing, but it could be a priority in terms of the planning that goes in recommendations that are made. I think it touches on a lot of have there in terms of reinventing the park needs stuff like you mentioned. There's plenty of parks up the ridge. Not an annual dog loves that, but I think there's plenty possibly. Just talking to public people might be identified opportunities there.
It's a good point. It's a good point.
I have a question.
Yep.
So what is the timing of these next steps?
Yes, so I need to go back and remember my timing. I believe we are planned for October, either late September or October. I need to double check. September or October hearing or scheduling for potential hearing for the plan.
So public hearing?
Yeah,
You're saying?
potentially. Yeah, so draft document within, I believe, the next month for review, and then starting to share that. I know there's a couple steps in terms of sharing the draft information with you all and with the community before we go straight into adoption. And I will double check that just to make sure, and I'll send Mike an email right after this once I take a look at my schedule.
Hopefully, we're aiming for end of September.
I know we get into November and all of that, it gets very tight.
So in the past, we've also considered things like there was a proposal for a zip line activity in one of the downtown areas, as well as a patio overlook on one of our parks. As well as we've got the bicycle group up in Snoqualmie Point Park. I don't see at least an element of economic development in the parks plan. Okay, I agreed we ought to have those trails do that community connectivity, but I also wouldn't put a hedge between them and the rest of the city. I'd want to pull some of that traffic in to our local businesses for lunch and whatever. So the economic development component needs to be somewhere in here as we go through this. And then the other one, you state, and people hate me, but I'm gonna do it anyway. You state as need, but what you're really identifying is want, and I'll pick on one case in point, which I would love to have personally. The disc golf course. Played it, love it, enjoy it. There's one over in North Bend, and tell you the truth, I'm not sure it gets used a lot. So what's the use of that facility? And if we were to do this facility here, how much use do we think we would get? Is it a want of a vocal few, or is it really a need? Again, I play it, I like it, it's fun to do, but you gotta face some realities and some of this, so. I need to see some spin along those ideas of, it's not just if we will build it, they will come, but. We really perceive a true need and it's building is secondary to the need coming. Okay, but
That's a great point. Yeah, there is always that fuzzy line when we do community outreach of what is the desire of someone versus what is it really do need. Some of that goes down to the type of facility as well. And in this case, it would kind of be an agreement with you that this golf is probably not the highest need. It might be a desire of the community, but it's something that out of the outreach came as something that the community was looking for. So it'd be interesting as next, sort of the next steps, and then even after the plan gets implemented, diving into some of those recommendations. I don't know if I have the ability to call on people, but
You absolutely do.
I can't say.
He does.
Yeah.
So Nick, just confirm that in the final product, we're gonna have all that 3,000 points of feedback we received with the big ideas. That'll all be in there in Appendi, correct? So none of this is getting edited out where the council's not gonna see what the community said.
Yeah, so currently there's actually I think Michael shared it with you as well. There's a year or so page long community survey or community outreach overview and summary document. But we also do have data available as from the back end of the website that came out. And if the community desires to have that be in the plan, that's something that can go into the plan.
I think scale is also important when it comes to disc golf. That course that's in North Bend
yeah, it's not that.
was originally a regular schmegular golf course that they turned into a disc golf course. So it's an enormous golf course. I don't think it would make sense to dedicate that much land in Snoqualmie to a disc golf course, but you can do much more reasonably sized disc golf courses. And I think it would be neat, would probably we could probably make one that would correspond to the need without using anywhere near the land that is dedicated to it in North Bend. But that being said, that's a great disc golf course. So it's your arm's tired by the end of that round. Do you have something, Councilmember? No?
That South Fork facility is packed. I went in there on a Wednesday night and it was packed.
Yeah. I went to the restaurant the other night. Fortunately, they're not playing disc golf in there. It's like over on the side. Anything else, anybody? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your help.
Appreciate it.
And let's move back to discussion item number 3, deliberation and review of the utility rate study, 2025 to 2030 utility capital improvement plan.
And Director Boutte will give the presentation on this one.
Hello, I am not Dylan and I will do an impression of Sergey, but we'll see how that goes. So feel free to rate me at the end of this.
Can you do the accent?
Not very well. Yeah. If I'm just able to communicate, that's usually good enough for me. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Indeed, it's going to be even in the same style as an FCS presentation, as you can see here. So tonight, we're going to just do an introduction, really a short introduction to the cost of service analysis that we're going to be completing. In essence, what's happening is we're moving on from phase 1 and moving into phase 2 now of this entire process. Phase 1 included figuring out what that revenue requirement was overall for the cost that we're seeing today, as well as into the future. And now we've got to figure out how are we going to allocate those different costs and the revenues that we need between the different customer classes. So we'll get into kind of a discussion what customer classes are for the most part. But now things are just going to get a little bit broader and maybe a bit more complex now after the first discussion that we've had so far. We're going to take the information from the previous conversation last week, and we're going to come up with a proposal eventually with council that includes the cost of service analysis piece to that. So if you recall, we were having discussions between option 1, between how much should be cash finance versus how much should be financed by a bond. Option number one was totally cash financed. Option number two was trying to maximize as much debt service in order to keep the rates low. And option number three was a hybrid in between both. Given the comments that we had received at that time, we believe somewhere in between option two and option three. So we're trying to split some hairs, kind of the difference for the most part, and then kind of work with that sense, and then conduct the cost of service analysis, bring that conversation back to eventually with that analysis that FCS group is doing, and then figure out where we want to go from there. So if we need to still go back to phase one and tweak that, we can certainly do so. That's not a problem. Just keep that in the back of your mind. That's potentially an option as a part of this if we're not excited about the rates and what they kind of look like. So with that said, I'm just going to give, kind of a brief presentation overview. We're going to explore the background a little bit, the overview of the rate setting process. And then really we're just focused on what is cost of service, kind of what is the methodology that goes into it, and what were some of the rate study results from 2020. And then we're going to try to answer any questions and have maybe a little brief discussion as well as kind of describe for you some of the next steps that are going to come up. In terms of background, back in 2023, November 2023, we performed a physical health review, really to kind of help support us for 2024 moving forward in light of the changes in cost inflation and growth. And we modified the 2024 rate schedule basically to kind of reflect that physical health review that we conducted. Now we're really engaged in a very important comprehensive rate study update that commenced this year. And as you recall, we've given several presentations, one that included the rate setting fundamentals presentation, a second one at the previous Parks Public Works Committee that described the revenue that would be required to, that we would need in order to help us pay for the costs associated with our CIP, with our debt service, with our operating expenses over time. And we also provided that same presentation, we called it the Sergey Light presentation at the July 8th council meeting. And so tonight we're going to be focusing on that introduction to the cost of service. So just once again, you've seen this slide before. Step number one is that revenue requirement, defining our overall needs by accounting for what kind of our existing revenues kind of look like. What is the debt currently right now? What are reserve targets in play? What are our operating reserve targets are, and as well as our capital reserve targets? What are they looking like? What do we need in terms of capital improvement plan? That capital improvement plan primarily reflects the previous utility CIP, but then also incorporates some information as well from the utility system plans. And then also trying to forecast what our operations and maintenance expenditures are going to look like over really a 6-year period. Now we're at this process where we figure out how much revenue we need to generate in order to pay for that cost of the entire combined utilities, so your water, sewer, and stormwater. And now we got to figure out a way to allocate that between the different customer classes. And then figure out how much revenue we need to kind of generate from those customer classes in order to meet that cost of service that we're providing. And then lastly, at the end of that, we would then engage in kind of our designing our rates overall, figuring out how much revenue, we know how much revenue we have to collect from, say, the residential customer class. Well, now how are we going to design the rates in order to accomplish that? Do we want to focus more on fixed charges, which would be a flat fee pretty much every month, or do we want to focus more on variable charges where it would go up or down depending on how much water consumption there is for each person or commercial business and so on. So that's, with that said, what is cost of service? Well, it's really allocating costs to different customer classes using utility specific data. In essence, this process is highly technical, and so we're often pulling different measures of usage and demand, using a lot of planning, engineering, and design criteria to kind of support our allocation factors, and then also figure out what our facility requirements are as well to figure out how much should we allocate towards, say, the residential customer class versus the commercial customer class and so on. The cost of service analysis is going to determine how much the total cost by class. So of our, for example, if we were paying $5 million in sewer expenses annually, would $2 million be there to service the residential customer class, or would $3 million be required to service the residential customer class? And so in essence, a lot of what this exercise is to try to figure out how much our total cost is represented by each customer class. And then also as a part of this, the fundamental question is, do cost differences exist to serve different customer classes? So that is the question that we're often asking ourselves. In terms of the classes of services for water, there are 4: residential, multifamily, commercial, and irrigation. For sewer, there is really 4 as well, residential, multifamily, and then we have a low commercial customer class as well as a high commercial customer class that is dependent on the biochemical oxidation demand as well as the total suspended solids, basically. So depending on how much you're generating and the strength of that as well will determine whether you're in the low customer class or the high customer class or a high commercial customer class. And then what you're not seeing on here on this slide is also stormwater. So stormwater doesn't have a customer class. It's based on the equivalent service units, which is a certain amount of square footage of impervious surface in the community. So if you're a resident that has a large, driveway, for example, then you might be paying more in equivalent service units and so on, or for stormwater fees, basically, but they're not really included as a part of this phase 2 of this exercise.
So would that involve assessing properties for impervious surfaces? Then,
Well, basically,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pollution generating impervious surfaces primarily,
okay, so not the footprint that your house is sitting on.
not necessarily, right? Yeah, unless you had certain types of metal roofing or something like that. But yeah, pollution generating impervious surfaces are typically asphalt where you drive with parked cars.
Okay.
Mhm.
So in essence, with cost of service, we're going to define equitable shares of cost responsibility by customer class. And then we're going to allocate the total utility cost by function. So the different utilities have different functions. Overall, they're there to serve customers, provide needs and services, make sure that we can sustain our base demand, make sure that we've got sufficient capacity to handle any sort of peak demand that comes through, as well as make sure that we've got flow there present in case we have any sort of fires that take place in the community that we need to suppress. So there's a lot of different functions with our water utility that we have to provide, and then we have to figure out what those costs are in order to provide those kind of different functions overall. When it comes to the sewer utility, we're often allocating the different costs based on the number of customers we have, the flow of it, how much is flowing into the treatment plant, as well as strength. So, the common example that we'll probably use for strength is if you're a brewery, for example, it's really hard to digest or to have our oxidation ditches out there. I don't know, you'd correct me if I'm wrong. Digest, right? Using a little shaky.
There's a lot of sugar in there that needs to be processed.
Yeah,
It takes up more treatment capacity.
and it requires,
This isn't coming from the restroom.
No,
No, so
Like the brewing of the,
Yes.
okay,
It's-
right.
Discharges have
the
higher-
use, right?
Okay,
The
right.
use that's
a lot more
generated as a
nutrients in it
result
that
of
have
it
to be treated, right?
requires greater cost of treatment, right, overall. And so consequently, we're often engaged in this process of making sure that those that are requiring the amount of effort or to process their flow pays their equitable share of that. So that's, brewers are kind of a common example associated with why we would move to a high customer or commercial class, basically, and why we've got it in place when it comes to our customer classes overall here at the city. In terms of the 2020 rate study overall, this chart's a little bit hard to see right here, but I mentioned kind of some of the 5 functions of the utility. There are costs related to providing average service provided on demand and are essentially correlated with year-round water consumption, which is your base. And so roughly, 26% of your expenditures are there in order to support just the ability to provide year-round water consumption. 41% of your water expenditures, this is coming from the 2020 rate study, were really present in order to provide peak demand service, which is associated with the ability of the system to provide capacity to customers with higher than average volume. So you can imagine the utility itself must supply water depending on the usage. There's certain periods in which there's peak demand overall. We can't shut it off and say, no, unfortunately, you can't have any, right? So in essence, we've got to make sure that we've got the capacity comes through your reservoirs and different infrastructure pieces like that in order to make sure that we've got that capacity in place in order to support those periods of peak demand overall. And so consequently, 41% of our water expenses from the 2020 rate study are related to the ability to provide for any of those kind of deep peak demand moments. When it comes to fire here, 15% of our total costs are associated with fire protection. And these are costs associated with providing adequate capacity and water flow corresponding to minimum fire safety standards. as well as the incremental costs for storage, transmission, distribution, and hydrants for fire protection. Customers are a relatively small percentage. These are costs associated with establishing and maintaining and servicing water customers and tend to include administrative billing and customer service costs. And then M&S stands for meters and service, and then that's the cost associated with installation, maintenance, and repair of meters and services overall, which is roughly 16% on this chart. In terms of sewer, we're to try to break this down between our kind of four functions overall in terms of flow. Flow is equal roughly to 50% of our total sewer expenses from the 2020 rate study. These are costs related to sewer volume processed within the system in a year. In terms of costs related to the strength of sewage processed relative to biochemical oxygen demand, that was roughly 25%. The cost related to processing based on total suspended solids were roughly 19%. And then your customers generally make up your other 1%, with reclaimed water making up 6% of that total sewage expense that was a part of this rate study. So that just kind of provides you with a sense where we're going to in the future, how that kind of broke down in the past. It may be relatively similar to what you're going to see moving forward, but these are cost shares that will be integral to our ability to figure out how much each customer class should be paying. In terms of the findings from the 2020 rate study, in terms of the cost of service analysis, we noticed that the multifamily customer classification was paying more than their equitable share of the cost of water, water service, and capital maintenance expenditures and so on. In addition, the commercial class and irrigation class, however, were below. So they were not paying their equitable share of the provision of water service to them overall. In addition to that, when it comes to sewer, we noticed at that study that the residential multifamily customer class were paying more than their fair share of sewer O&M as well as capital expenses, and that both commercial low was relatively even, but commercial high and reclaimed water were not paying as much as they should. And so the goal over time for us is to work towards balancing this out. And we'll have conversations kind of as we move into it about how we would strategize about how we balance that out over time. And indeed, and Councilmember Holloway was here back then where we did make significant strides towards making sure that everyone's paying their fair, equitable share of the cost to provide service to their customer classes, and we'll be engaging in that same sort of process when it comes to this.
Can you back up a slide though?
Yes.
So if we stop doing potable water irrigation tomorrow, does that cost of the reclaimed water in green go away?
If we stopped doing that, well, so that's water that is currently used to irrigate parks, correct? And other,
The parkway, some of it goes to the golf course. I mean, it's that represents the reclaimed water, which right now we're going to Eagle Lake. Correct?
I guess I don't understand your question. You're asking. Can you say that again?
That section where it says the cost of reclaimed water.
in which we're gonna be figuring out what that new number is. Right, for
Okay,
this
but
study.
I'm prepping for a conversation to come.
Mhm.
That being, if we were to stop doing that, we would still be making that water. But that water would be going into the river.
To the river, correct.
Okay, so there is some benefit to us of that water going to irrigation.
Correct.
I just don't want us to get to the stage that we're gonna take that, in this case, $6 million or whatever it is. And say, oh, irrigation, you need to pay for all of this. Cause there is some benefit to us to have that water to go to irrigation versus potable water, which we just treated, put all the money to treat and everything else. So I just wanna, this gets to be a very nuanced conversation that we're headed into, and I just want to set some of that nuance up.
It's 300,000.
Hmm?
It's 300,000.
300,000, I'm sorry. It's too small even on my screen to read.
I got a third lens.
gonna take my phone out and take a picture to blow it up, but no.
But you're correct. We would still need to manufacture the same material.
Right, I just,
Its destination would be different.
correct, and I know that the conversations come is why is the irrigation system not fully funding that cost? That's because there's some benefit to us to do that.
Is there a way to quantify that benefit?
Yes. Yeah. That's what we're doing.
Okay, so in terms of the implementation alternatives considered last time, council considered 5 alternatives for implementation. The selected alternative was to basically set the multifamily customer class to 0 for the combined utilities through 2026, where water and sewer were set to decrease, but stormwater was to follow the system average. And so consequently, we're trying to correct for the fact that they were paying more than their equitable share. And we're seeking to hold them to 0 during that time period to bring them back into alignment with where they should be overall. Commercial classes offset the change in the multifamily class, but the increases were not to exceed 8%. So there was a limit that council had put onto what those increases might look like for the commercial classes. And the residential class was set to the system average increase overall. And so in terms of the results overall, our goal was to target approximately 40% progress towards really cost of service equity by 2026 for the combined non-residential classes, with most classes projected to reach the cost of service equity by 2031, with the exception of high commercial. So we set a pathway out there basically towards trying to achieve that equity overall between our different customer classes. And now we're going to be conducting the analysis behind the scenes or figure out how much progress have we made and how much further do we have to go in order to reach that, and then come back to eventually with what that analysis states, and then figure out with you what those strategies are and how fast you may want to go towards achieving that equity over time. So with that said, we will continue with the cost of service and rate design analyses, which are going to be presented at a later date. And then in terms of the next steps, really, I think we're looking for probably, I want to say the beginning of August for a cost of service and rate design kind of discussion overall. And we're going to try to adhere to that budget calendar as much as we possibly can. They're doing a lot of analysis as quickly as they can behind the scenes, and we're making progress. So anyway, with that said, thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that we have specific costs that we know in advance. We're going to need to raise X number of dollars to make the improvements that we need to make the system run properly and keep it running. So it feels like most of the job of determining the rate study is mathematical, that we're really talking about fine tuning those numbers. What range of the total cost will that fine tuning that we discuss fall into?
So
Does my question make any sense?
I don't know what the margin of error, if that like plus or minus 5%, whether.
Are you asking on average, what's the percentage rate increase year to year?
No, that's not what I was asking. What I was saying is that we have fixed costs that we have to achieve through these rates. And what we're really talking about is fine tuning those rates between the different classes of customer. And I'm wondering how much of what we're going to be fine tuning, what the overall percentage is of that in someone's bill. And
So
does my question make sense to you?
Well,
I'm not so much concerned about Mr.
there was key decisions, right? There's going to be key decisions for council to make overall. The first one was the last council meeting, right? Overall, do you want fully capital
Right.
finance? And you saw the impact of that.
Mhm.
You also saw the impact if you were to go the opposite direction and try to fund a lot of this. through
Okay,
bonds,
so those
right?
were very big percentages.
Those were big
difference,
percentages
yeah.
overall. And so trying to find what is council's appetite for which option, that was really critical considering what we also had kind of a discussion as well regarding the utility CIP. What projects are we gonna fund when is really important to that conversation. And I think we've had discussions about the necessity of a lot of those projects. They come out of the utility system plans that we've developed so far, but there is maybe space for conversation about what that kind of looks like overall when it comes to council. When we had discussions previously about the key assumptions built into the utility rate study about your operating expenses. As you may have noticed, we had discussions about 5 positions, for example.
Right.
We've had conversations subsequent to that about maybe delaying a few of those positions over the years, for example, that we'll probably bring back as a part of an ongoing conversation with the utility rate studies. So those are the kind of levers that you have already kind of pulled for the most part, and which we'll kind of continue to pull as we kind of move through this. You know, and it's like shades of gray a little bit, right? So if you're feeling a little apprehensive, right, then we can try to go back and figure out what kind of levers can we pull in order to make this work as strong as.
No, I think yeah, your answer tells me that there are different strategies with wildly different results for the consumer's bill.
Yeah,
And as we make those decisions, we get closer and closer to with each
right, we do. Yeah.
meeting to figuring out exactly.
Now understanding, you know, how much do we want to make progress towards full equity? You know, if we're determining that full equity is now going to be 2025, that can bring significant changes to the different customer classes, right, overall, which is why council in the past wanted to have kind of a smooth progression out over time, because they don't want that impact to hit fully immediately come 2025 necessarily. So, you know, we'll be able to show you kind of the results on an average residential bill, an average low commercial bill, an average high commercial bill overall, and you can see what the impacts are from that with the tweaks that we make here and as we kind of progress forward. So you'll get options when we come back to you with the cost of service analysis. It says, okay, if you were to make this adjustment now, here's what it looks like. If you were to make this adjustment in 10 years or try to figure out a way to graduate this over 10 years, this is kind of what the progression kind of looks like and what that rate increases would look like. So
Thank you for explaining that again.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
like some sensitivity, right?
Right.
There's gonna be some sensitivity analysis that comes with this.
So 4 or 5 councils ago, they did not set up a rate structure which intentionally overcharged multifamily units.
Those guys.
There was a set of assumptions that went into that, which said that was the best way to equitably distribute that cost amongst the service users. I think the main thing that came in as we started to understand really the cost of reclamation of different versus a family unit versus a commercial unit. Commercial unit has a lot more of those biosolids and oxygens, other things in it that really the new assumption was commercial costs a little more to clean the water up than does residential. And that's where we all of a sudden we saw that disparity between commercial and multifamily. I have parts of this wrong, you need to correct me, but vague memory. But it was also like, just because we changed the assumption on how we equitably distribute that, doesn't mean that we should whipsaw them and all of a sudden jump commercial rates by 100%. So we said, we did a phasing plan that says, hold multifamily where they are, make no change to their costs, and start to bring commercial up, but try to limit it to 8% a year. So it's something manageable that they can absorb. And that was the plan that you saw there back then. But again, those assumptions are still there that different classes of users have different cost to treat their water. And we know that now, we need to take that into consideration. You also see that in the 2 classes of commercial, the light and heavy.
Yeah,
As far as
I feel like 2015 is when we separated
Yeah.
commercial out into low and high for the most part, because we wanted to account for the differences between, you go to other cities, you go to the one next door. They may not necessarily have those types of breakdowns right overall. And so I think we've done a good job over time of making progress towards trying to sort that out. And making sure that our utility rates are set fairly and equitably for the different customers that are paying our rate here. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
So next month, we'll get the information on those cost of service what we're seeing so far as how that's
Yeah, that's our
affected the
goal.
different
Yeah,
classes.
we're making progress towards it. Yeah.
Okay,
Still some data requirements that we have to fulfill.
I just have to go back to the whole brewery question. Is it the same for wineries?
Yes.
Is it with the
Yes.
sugars?
Yeah, a little bit different. So with breweries and wineries, most of the water that's used goes out in the product,
Yeah,
right? And then so you're dealing with a lot of washed down materials. Distilleries, though, on the other hand, they distill off. I don't, not that we have any here, but that's coming.
yeah,
And most of that processed water, or most of that water that they use to create the alcohol, it goes down the drain. And that is some very high strength waste, and it's a huge volume. So those things tend to be higher impact to a facility.
good for now.
Yeah.
The other one that, when we did that multifamily change back to the other group, were those in heavy use of soap.
Mhm.
Okay, soap going in, why do you wash your hands? To kill bacteria. What are those trenches we looked at the waste treatment plant? It's bacteria eating, so if you dump soda in, it's gonna take a hit. So those businesses that use a lot of soap, I'm not gonna
No, that's true.
elucidate on that. One, some of them have, they need to retain or treat some of the water themselves, but that does come back to us, is harder to treat. So you got different classes as you go.
And that's true of all commercial, because, what comes off the residential waste stream is fairly consistent, right? Across the board. But you might get all kinds of different things, different components, constituents in commercial wastewater, which, can sometimes help, but sometimes makes it more difficult to treat. And the flow and the load is oftentimes typically much higher.
Okay, good.
Good. All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Matei.
Thank you.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. So,
I have one hand.
oh, go ahead.
Just for clarification on the two discussion items, do you want those both to be heard at the July 22nd council meeting? Or
Does that work for you?
So I'm partially concerned we never get done before 10 o'clock. So I'm asking for some guidance. Can we space them out? What's the priority here, and can we space them out? I think city administrator has his hand up.
I don't necessarily want to answer your question. I just want to give you a little more context. There will be executive and closed sessions at the next council meeting also.
Not helping me.
Sorry.
And a round table. Don't we have a round table before?
Yeah, but that's 6. I'm worried this will go into the 7 o'clock and after. Roundtable will end by 7 o'clock, one way or the other.
I think we have to move the CIP discussion and the rate study discussion forward, don't we? Isn't that something that we have to discuss? It may be that our Parks and Recreation, I know that we're going to hear more about that in October.
Once the full.
So there might be more leeway in when we bring that forward.
Please, but your question was, I mean, yes, they both need to come to council. Do they both need to come to council next week? Or can one come next week and one come in 2 weeks? What's the impact? But
It is on the it is the work study for the roundtable at 6 o'clock.
I didn't look at the.
So your question then is about the pros plan and whether or not that needs to come forward at the next meeting?
If they're split, I withdraw. Go ahead and do it.
I don't think the pros plan is on there.
So I believe there's a council roundtable, is that correct?
Right.
Yes.
That's it.
That includes the utility CIP plus rate discussion overall. In essence, all council would get would be the same sort of presentation that I delivered today. So there's not any sort of additional analysis that would come with that.
So don't diminish that. That was a very good presentation.
Well-
You did an excellent job.
It's an introduction. So with that said, my perception is that maybe the council workshop isn't quite necessary at this moment. We could bring Sergey back with data, right, to the next Parks and Public Works Committee meeting. And then he can condense the two presentations, both the introduction as well as the data, into one presentation that would then be presented down the road.
I like
Which
the
would
sound of
then
that.
ideally eliminate the work roundtable.
What do you think about that, Mayor Pro Tem?
Either that, I was thinking of throwing them both in the roundtable. If each one can be done in 30 minutes, we can have them done in roundtable, not part of the overall agenda.
Well, it sounds like Mr.
But if
Patay is
he's
saying
willing to
that we
split-
don't necessarily need to. We can wait on Sergey for follow-up.
Okay,
If he adds more data.
I'm trying to get agenda out away from after 7 o'clock, because again, I just like to get home before 10 o'clock on some council night.
Council person.
Yeah.
So the pros plan is not part of the council agenda. That was only at your
only-
discussion.
Okay,
What is on the council agenda is the Eagle Lake discussion again.
That one needs to go forward. Yeah. Yeah, that one does. I'm sorry, right? Non-consent.
it's a discussion, yeah.
The discussion.
You can't
Yeah.
you can't have a discussion.
Yeah.
So, well, you could, but.
Real short discussion.
Yes, that one definitely needs to come forward. I think we gave Mr. Vining some directions on the presentation for that. You heard that, right? So, yeah, I think definitely that one needs to come forward.
Maybe we split the difference. Maybe we keep the roundtable with the one subject of the utility rate study, but if we can get it done for 30 minutes, how about the roundtable starts at 6:30? And then leave the rest of the council agenda at 7 as is.
Is there time for that to make that change? There's time to make that change.
FNA sets the council agenda next meeting.
Okay.
Would that work?
I think it's a possibility. What I fear with this presentation is because there's 2020 data in here, right? You can almost get enough time, right? Sergey would be able to collect the data necessary in order to carve out what 2024 actually looks like and then be able to present the same pie charts in the future with 2024 data instead of the 2020 data that we're presenting today. So I could certainly do the same sort of presentation that I did today, but just keep in mind.
But it sounds like you're saying that would be redundant and not as
Potentially.
strong as having the more accurate information in the
I would
presentation.
Probably say so.
In that case, is there a way to just eliminate the roundtable?
I'm not gonna fight to keep it if you want to get rid of it.
I'd
Rather, if there's additional information relevant to that presentation from Sergey coming, that we hold it and include it. I would prefer the information to come up through committee to go to council versus half of it come up through committee and go to council and then we add something. Okay, which kind of sounds like Sergey was going to add something.
I'd rather Sergey come back around to Parks and
Okay,
Public
so-
Works if
In that case.
So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Eliminate the roundtable?
looking for his hand.
Unless you want to do the Eagle Lake discussion at that time.
In the roundtable? Was that going to be part of the roundtable?
It wasn't, but we could move it.
It's a discussion, so I mean, you can
Nick-
move it.
And that could be your half hour.
How about that?
I like that. I like that. I think that's an
Roundtable,
important discussion. What do you
Eagle
think?
Lake.
I'm good with it.
Okay, it sounds like we're unanimous on that. It's a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Chambliss.
It was the mayor's idea.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And it sounds like Mr. Vining, you'll be the star of that roundtable. Okay, you look fantastic already. All right, so are we good now? We good? We're all,
We're always.
is that everything?
I'm just not sure you can talk to employees and say they look fantastic, but go on.
That was been completely copied. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn before I wrote myself into a lawsuit.
So moved.
Second that.
All right, we are adjourned.